to Gerg and Muxl, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics in gaming, how they work, and why we love them. I am Muxl.
I'm Gerg.
And we are very happy to be speaking to you today about real-time strategy games. Again, we have been kind of on an RTS kick. I know we did Tab before this.
Oh, yeah.
We've been playing Subcom and Startcraft. Correct. And that's going to be the comparison to those two games is going to be the focus of this episode.
I am a very happy... I was going to say I'm in hog heaven. And then I was thinking I'm a very happy Gerg. And I was going to say I'm a very happy hog. Which would be a strange way to refer to myself. That's something I do. My friends will know this. Not refer to myself as a hog, but combine two idioms together. I'm super happy because I love RTSs so much, and having not been able to play them a whole ton over the past, 8 years.
Greg's taking a bit of a hiatus.
Yeah, I might just be trying to get my fix. Like maybe this is all just subconsciously me trying to get to play games like through you.
Yeah. That's probably
it.
You're very good at this.
Mark has a very it's been a long game, but I think I finally got here. Seriously, I am super excited to just be talking and think about RTSs because it is kind of a dead genre. Dead's a strong word, but a far less popular genre than it used to be. And I just love the idea of managing and building and organization combined with military tactics and that is pretty much exactly it's half city builder and half little tactical kind of tabletop command functionaries. Mm-hmm. And the interplay between those two things is actually going to be in large part what we're going to talk about today. The difference in the term RTS, real-time strategy, real-time is not horribly controversial, but the strategy part, and this has been written about in other places, but there's very few actual strategy games. Very few RTSs I would maintain are true strategy games. There are a lot of strategy games.
Sure.
But those tend to look something more like 4X games, like something like Civilization. What was the one that... Sins of a Solar Empire. Or say obviously chess would be a decent example as well. That one's far less tactical and more strategic. But a whole lot of RTSs actually I think are far close to RTTs, as it were. And StarCraft, I think... So StarCraft 1 is a interesting, close to hybrid, has a lot of strategic depth, but in terms of what most people would play outside of high-level pro play, basically to be good at the game, you don't need a whole ton of strategy. You just need to be able to be actually very tactical and very quick. As opposed to Subcom, which is kind of the other end of that spectrum, which I would argue is very close to a true RTS in kind of the class, in the broadest, most pure term with strategy.
Before we go much further, do you want to delineate those two terms? And
I believe that's very important.
Yes, I think that is important. We've talked about this on the cast before.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure it's come up.
I don't want to make the people dig up the episode. I don't even necessarily know which episode number we're
This is only for the diehards.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So, if you don't know, not... You want me to do it? I'll do it.
Yeah.
In broad terms, I'm sure there's actual dictionary definitions of these terms that I'm gonna butcher a little bit.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. We missed. No. They missed those ones. Actually, it's notorious that they never went back. Tactics tend to refer to more kind of moment to moment. Here are the things that I have. Here are the things that the opponent has. So say I have a bunch of archers, and he has a bunch of shield men who are immune to archers. But he's got a bunch of horses, cavalry that take a lot of damage from archers. I move my archers around to avoid the shield dudes and shoot the cavalry. Right, that's a tactic. That is a real time. And I just use the phrase real time, which is probably why it takes a little bit easier to that, or the genre takes a little bit more naturally to tactics, because it's something that you're doing in response to what's already coming at you. It's your kind of decision making on the spot with how to use the tools that you have, and how to properly organize and how to properly well, maybe not organize, how to properly command and control. That would be closer to the delineation between micro and macro. So micro would be more tactics, right? So when you're actually in a battle and you have your two armies confronting each other, how you control your units and what abilities you cast and all of that is tactics. And most of the time, even in competitive games, RTS has really come down to those moments, right?
Yeah.
StarCraft 2 is actually, we can maybe get into this a little bit later. StarCraft 2 was actually far more tactical itself in a lot of ways. Than StarCraft 1. Okay. StarCraft 1 was a better mix of strategy and tactics, and StarCraft 2 was far less strategic and actually far more tactical. Who was going to control the battle better was just going to win the game. It was less about what you built. Anyway, so strategy, as opposed to tactics, would be more how you get to that point where you have to begin to use tactics. So your build order, the order in which you build things and produce units, the location, the types of units you're going to be using. Strategy is more a big overarching way that you're going to win the game. So if the strategy for every single game is just, I'm going to build more than my opponent, and then I will win, that's not very strategic, right? There's not too much thinking.
There's no depth strategically. Right. You already know what your strategy is.
And that was a big problem with StarCraft 2, is basically the person who built more things would win.
Right.
So in terms of what they built or how they built or in what order or in what timings or what... Strategy is like a way to get to the victory, a way to get to the win. Like it's the guiding force behind your tactics, what you're trying to do to get to the win. And like I said, that gets significantly lowered, and a lot of RTSs have this problem, which is whoever builds more units is going to win. Mm. And obviously that is appropriate to some degree because that's just a part of the game, is being able to, if you can build more units, you're better at the game. But there should be a level of what you're building and the choices you're making throughout the game should determine. I love the idea of a smart player beating a technically superior player, doing something brilliant. And those are my favorite moments in esports, when people do these crazy strategic things that are probably shouldn't have worked or wouldn't be considered cheesy necessarily, but are something that was a response to the way their opponent was playing, right. And they outthought their opponent and pulled something off that was insane. But wasn't just the classic, hey, I out-macroed you, right. I out-built you.
It was actually getting in their head.
Right,
and
exactly.
Responding to how they read that player.
Yeah, precisely. So that to me is more strategy, which is the big overarching, and tactic is smaller, kind of on-the-ground decision-making. Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me that as long as you have limited... Well, you always have limited. The fewer win conditions that you have, the narrower your strategy is going to be necessarily. So in a 4X game, you have a lot of different win conditions. Mm-hmm. At least most of the ones I'm familiar with, you have many different ways you could win.
Right.
Some of them don't involve fighting anybody at all.
Right.
And some of them involve wiping everybody off the globe, right?
Yeah.
So in a RTS game... It's almost always some variant of destroy most of or all of your opponent's stuff. Yeah. And so that seems like it would necessarily constrain the strategic options that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. That's another thing that one of my other favorite RTS games, which you haven't played, it's called Dawn of War. It's made by a company named Relic. They did Company of Heroes as well, if you're familiar with those. They're still true RTSs, but they're not base building. So you're talking about the win condition. The win condition for a lot of the Relic games was it was victory points, basically. Mm-hmm. Each side has 500 victory points. There's 3 victory point places. They're called VPs, victory points.
Interesting.
On the map. And when you move a unit and capture it, and when you have it captured, it begins to drain on your opponent's counter, right? Okay. So if you have 1, it's 1 a second. If you have 2, it's 2 a second. If you have all 3,
it's 3 a second.
And so on and so forth. If they have 1, you have 2, then it's 1, right?
Right.
And whoever drops to 0 first loses. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it's not about annihilation, it's about point control.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being able to build more things necessarily. Sometimes it does come down to that. If you kill everything on the map, then you just control the points, right? Yeah. But a big part of it is being able to be sneaky about, or being clever about ways to capture a point. And especially when it gets down really low and it's getting really close, sometimes you don't even have to win the game. You can do something that wouldn't work in the long term, but would be enough to be able to get that point for just long enough that you can win.
Right.
But wouldn't work. So anyway, decision making becomes a lot more important, as opposed to just control. Right. So you're absolutely right. Even the not only the number of win conditions, but the type of win condition that is so common, and that's also Starcraft is in fact this way as well.
Right.
Ooh, and this is another Subcom play competitively. It's different actually.
Yeah.
Starcraft is destroy everything, destroy all your enemies' buildings.
Right.
That's it.
And Subcom, I believe the technical term for that one condition is capture the flag. It's not?
No.
Dang it.
Assassination.
Assassination. Okay. So in that case, you have to just kill your enemy's commander.
Yep, just one unit.
I knew the wing edition. I just didn't know the name for it.
Yeah, no, it's...
Assassination. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So in that case, it doesn't matter. Your opponent you could have one unit left. That's your commander.
Right.
And you could, as long as you've killed their commander, if they have a whole army, it does not matter.
Yep.
Because you won.
And there's things to do. Anyway, so that's a broad. We're kind of getting a little bit into the specifics already, but that's a broad delineation
between tactics
and strategy. And again, using Starcraft 2, which we won't get too much into, as an example, that really is a game of Sean, Day 9, who's an excellent Starcraft. He was a pro player and is a professional caster and was a big name in the community for a long time, and now he's doing other amazing things. When he was doing Starcraft 2 dailies, it was funny because when Starcraft 2 came out, he was trying to stay upbeat about it because he was a Brood War player, Starcraft 1, but you could tell he wasn't quite enjoying it as much as Brood War because it was so much less strategic and nuanced. And I remember there was one time he was streaming and he just watched just this Terran just death blob of units, just attack moved across the map and just killed everything in their way, and that was the end of the game.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, finesse in Brood War, kill shit in Starcraft 2. That was like so much of the strategy came down to like go and kill him.
Right.
Like if you have the units to do it, do that. And if you don't, get more units.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm oversimplifying. There is strategic elements to Starcraft 2, but in large part that was pretty much it.
I felt that sense of finesse that Starcraft 1 feels or requires really acutely when I played. And maybe this is a good transition into talking about that. I am curious what sets apart, because we've talked about win conditions as a way to increase strategic depth, and StarCraft 1 and 2 have the same win condition. So I'd love to hear at some point about what you think sets those two games apart strategically and why one favors strategic thinking more than the other.
Absolutely.
But since we're here, let's talk about finesse in StarCraft 1.
Yeah.
Because that really threw me for a loop, man. I have to say.
Well, with a disclaimer that we threw you into the absolute deep end.
That's true.
Again. I did that on both games, actually, slightly by accident.
But hey, at least it was, it's a fair comparison, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like I had easy mode for Subcom and then something
hard
really
mode
tough for
that's a good point,
StarCraft. Yeah. So I had hard mode for both. And
you only have more fun now as we keep on playing them.
Exactly. So I played, I don't know the name of the map, but I have very little StarCraft experience in that the only time I've ever played StarCraft was at like a birthday party when I was in high school. Yeah. And I just put it on a bunch of VMs and sent it to my friends and we like all played in my basement. It was a good time, but I have no real developed sense of StarCraft. Yeah. And so I was surprised when I played just like last week with Greg, of just how you couldn't just throw a bunch of units at something. That doesn't actually work in StarCraft, and that a variant on that theme has worked in most RTSs that I've played recently. Yeah. And I will put Subcom and PA in that category, in that I felt like that would work. Whether or not that's accurate at like a competitive level, probably not. It's fine. I can't speak to that. I don't have that experience. But if I were to build a bunch of tanks in Subcom, I would assume that would be probably enough to overwhelm my opponent and just sort of win.
And this is an important thing. I want to but I want to put a pin in that because that's you're correct.
Okay.
But I have more to say about that.
So I was sort of expecting StarCraft to play that way, just because most of the RTSs I've invested a lot of time in, that's how they've played. I think Homeworld, it's been a while, but I think Homeworld 2, which I played a bit, did also play that way, where you could pretty easily overwhelm your opponent with just sheer numbers of things. And in StarCraft, it really didn't feel like that was an option, even when it felt like we had very superior numbers. We would still get pretty badly harassed by some Zerg units that I was playing against. And that took me off guard, because it just felt like no matter how many units I had, it wasn't enough to actually pierce the enemy's defense and do some real damage. which was discouraging.
Yeah, which is not actually a great... I think it was Ash Rose?
Okay, as the map.
Maybe? No, that wasn't it.
It was an absolute maze, and the pathing was atrocious, but that's neither here nor there. Everyone knows that the game has some pathing issues.
Yeah, so I'll unpack that a bit. We were playing Terran against Zerg, TVZ, as it were. That's an annoying thing in the matchups for StarCraft, right? It's the three races: Terran, Protoss, and Zerg. So it's T, Z, and P, and then V obviously is always going to be used.
Right.
So to talk about matchups, they are all the exact same vowel sound with the letter, you know? PVT, ZVT, TVT.
Yeah, it's all like long E's.
Yeah, exactly. But the map was... Yeah, so there's the other thing that I think we've even talked about StarCraft a little bit, and this will also go into the conversation of why the strategy, I think, is a little bit higher in StarCraft 1, which is an interesting problem. But it's an older game, 1998, I believe, and the pathing the pathing algorithms for moving large amounts of units is atrocious. It's even I think even by standards back then it was bad, because you can play like Age of Empires.
Yeah.
And it's like, I never remember having the same, just like, bash my head against the computer frequency of when I've played StarCraft 1.
And the map we were playing is pathological for pathfinding. Yeah. Like, it is basically a maze. But yes, I don't think I've ever had a pathfinding experience quite that bad in a video game. Yeah,
and so like you said, it was totally compounded by the fact that not only did we pick a map with an actual island in it that we couldn't reach without air units, but we also picked pretty much a labyrinth where everything was on a different level, and to get from point A to point B, you had to go in some big winding path around instead of just going directly to it.
Yeah,
and that was very, very difficult in terms of, again, unit management. Also, the other huge thing with StarCraft 1 was that you could only select 12 units at a time at any point for anything. And that's also a big problem when you have, upwards of 50 to 100 units. Yeah. Because that's a lot of command groups you have to be managing. Much less the attrition and the level of there's a decently high level of fatality in the game in terms of turnover. The game is designed to, you don't just build one army and then win with it. You can, you actually have to keep on producing something.
Right.
Do the micro and macro together. In order to win, and that's really hard to continually update all of these groups over and over and over. So yeah, it was a really interesting thing where we had objectively, I mean, must have been an easy AI, or like the easiest AI, and we just had if the map had been empty, we would have just moved across and won. Like, we had way more units, and we had a fine mix, upgrade Marines and siege tanks, and some engineering vessels,
medics,
or science vessels, and then medics. Yeah, so it was like a classic Terran Brood War army. And it took us like an hour to win.
Yeah.
Which is, like I said, I think some of this goes into the map.
Sure. It was a big map, and it's very windy.
Yeah. And we just didn't use, so the other thing that's interesting here is that even if we had performed everything perfectly, tactically, soundly, that was a lot of lees that I just used, we missed out on the winning strategy for that map, which was
air control.
Yeah, air units.
Yeah,
that was the end. If you can fly over this stupid map of also there was an island, and the Zerg took the island and fortified it significantly, then we won. And that's eventually what I did towards the end. Is I just built battle cruisers and we swept the rest of the map.
Right.
But that would have been a huge, I mean, that would have reduced we could have done that off the bat and won in 20 minutes,
Right.
So I just think that's slightly interesting in terms of, that wouldn't be quite true in StarCraft 2, but not because it's a worse game. Actually, this is an interesting thing. It's because it was programmed better. You'd be able to navigate that map so much easier with the pathfinding of StarCraft 2, which is very, very good.
Yeah.
It's very good, as well as the selection is perfect, right? It's got all the modern RTS toys.
Right.
In terms of unit management and selection, idle workers, and all that jazz, and economy. And so that's not a better or worse thing, that's just it's a different thing.
Right.
And I think that level of having so many things that can go wrong if you extrapolate that out into the rest of the game, the competitive scene with Brood War, I think it really does make for more breadth of things that you can do in the game, in terms of taking advantage of all these little glitches or doing something that's really difficult, because no one would think to do that with these types of units because the pathing would be so bad, or there's all kinds of other glitches in the game, that are easily. There's an interesting one with Scourges, actually, which are it's a tiny Zerg unit that's a kamikaze unit, and you build it and it flies. It can only attack other flying units. But with the correct micro, you can basically, if a Scourge unit is give an attack command onto you and it's coming towards you, you can move in such a way, you can make a circle, basically, or a diamond or some sort of shape, that you can make it miss and still explode. So it'll register a hit, but it won't do any damage, and so you can actually literally avoid these.
Away from these.
Which is insane. It's so cool. But it was a glitch. That wasn't supposed to happen.
Right.
You shouldn't be able to do that. So it's similar to Melee when we've talked about Smash Melee, right? In terms of all of these weird little things that are part of the game that aren't perfectly polished and glitches and that people have found and been able to take advantage of. I'm not saying that that's the only reason Brood War is a more strategic game than StarCraft 2. I think by design it's also a more strategic game. But I think that is a part of it, and that we saw very strongly with your... I don't know, misadventure?
What do you want to call that?
I was going to say, I don't know.
Epic combat.
Yeah.
You brought up a few really interesting points. One I wanted to talk about was the fact that the pathing was so bad made the air superiority, like, much more superior.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's a reason why you can't use the ground units, and it's because it will be, like, almost unusable.
Yeah.
Like, it was terrible. The pathing was terrible.
Yeah.
And so that meant that using the wrong strategy there, you were heavily punished for.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have a game where things are a little bit more, like, finicky, like, you can make them work, but it's just, like, you will, if you've picked the wrong system or the wrong strategy, that you will feel like you're fighting your tools, basically.
Yeah.
Because even though if you're a top-level StarCraft player, you could have made it work as a ground force, I'm sure that that's very doable. It still would have been, you would have been doing more work than your opponent if your opponent would have gone air.
Absolutely.
And so being able to read, like, okay, I could do this because I'm a good player. What's the easier thing that I could do that's going to allow me to spend my resources somewhere else?
Yeah, nice.
I think it introduces a much more complex gameplay where just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point you make about in terms of the the amount of resources, mental resources you have to expend on a strategy versus another one, which is strategic thinking of itself, right? Like, I can do this, but it's going to be harder than this way. That's all, you're already thinking in a strategic fashion, right? That's a how am I going to get to the win kind of mindset. Right. And obviously, if say microing that army takes 500 APM and going air takes 200, then odds are, certainly in any tournament context, the air player is going to come out on top every time. So that's an interesting, and the other interesting thing too, I think, is again with the StarCraft 1 to 2, we will get to SubCom here, but just talking about strategy versus tactics, I think is actually a little bit useful there. And again, I want to at least underline one: StarCraft 2 has had a very, very diverse, complex life cycle and tons of balance changes and units and being introduced with the expansions, as well as sometimes units being totally reworked or removed actually from the game and the multiplayer entirely, and in an effort to continually make it more and more strategic. And I think it's at a far better place now than it was when it released at Wings of Liberty, so definitely take that into account. But that being said, it is an interesting kind of comparison, and it is just interesting to me that, similar to, in some ways, with Melee and Smash, Ultimate, at least, like, when developers try to design a game to be played competitive, like StarCraft 2, like StarCraft 1 was like how esports began, almost. Like, it was the national sport of South Korea, literally. I mean, it was insane. There were unprecedentedly large people making careers and media and all this jazz. And so StarCraft 2 was like the heir apparent. It was like the chance to update everything to modern and make it blow up even more.
Right.
And it didn't. It still had a very healthy competitive scene that's still going, but didn't get anywhere close to the Brood War scene at its height. And I just think that's so interesting. The Brood War was absolutely not designed even a little bit with competitive in mind.
No.
Oh, Lord. No. And StarCraft 2 was. And somehow they weren't able... So I think the point of all this is to say that it's hard, especially with RTSs, with the amount of units and just combinations and permutations and just the complexity of a game like an RTS, and different maps and different races and different players and all these things. I think it's really hard to figure out what is going to work, how to make something that perfect little middle ground that Brood War seemed to have found between the tactics and strategy, where not just the better player strategically will always win, or neither will just the player that builds more and always win that way. So I think there's a slight level of mystery. I don't think we can quite figure it out ourselves here.
Yeah.
And there was the question of like, why was Brood War so much more strategic? I mean, the short answer is that you couldn't always just build. There were different ways you could win. There were different strategies for different maps, and in general, that's a lot less true for. There's usually one objectively best strategy for each race in StarCraft 2, which was not the case with Brood War.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I have not played enough to be able to confirm that, but I totally believe you. You have talked about the quirkiness of StarCraft 1, and I wonder if that gets us started toward answering that question. Because when a system is really finicky and weird and quirky, it's a lot harder to sort of fit it all in your brain at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not consistent, and so you have to be aware, and you have to learn all of the little like quirks and things. But the thing is, even once you learn about the quirks, you may not be thinking about all of them all at the same time.
Sure.
Because your brain is just limited, and you can't always consider every aspect of something.
Yeah.
And so a game like chess, there's so many permutations that you can still play a new game of chess today, even though it's been around for millions. Well, sorry, not millions of years.
We were crawling out of the primordial slime.
Millions of games. Yeah. I think I probably can say millions of games. We gotta be getting close to a million. If we haven't played a million games of chess.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do think that the sort of persnickety nature of StarCraft 1 might make it more strategic because there are so many different things you might just decide to focus on.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
and ways to be able to do it.
There are hundreds of ways the game acts weird, but maybe the 10 ways that I pick to sort of focus on and exploit are going to defeat the 10 ways that you pick to focus on.
I think the interesting thing there too is that added complexity doesn't necessarily make a game more strategic, right? It's the fact that all of those ways are good or actually doable, right? They're actually viable strategies by themselves. I think that's because if you just make a million different ways that you could play the game, but 900,000 of them suck.
Right.
That's still 100,000. That's a bad example.
Then you only have 100,000 ways to win.
99,999 of them suck. Then it's irrelevant, right? Everyone's just going to play the one way that you play the game.
Right.
And that wasn't true in Brood War. There were multiple ways that were all equally good and still diverse. And that's something I've talked about with RTS design before, which is the way that you make a really balanced game. Where you have a bunch of different ways that you can do it is you just homogenize everything.
Right.
The more different things there are to do, the more likelihood there is that one's going to be stand out better, and that you're going to have to just do that. So the fact that, like I said, Brood War didn't really have that, and actually had a very large variety of ways you could play it successfully, and like competitively is I think the big difference with, because I think StarCraft 2 you could do that as well. I think there were a lot of different ways. I think it was just there's no reason to do these things that were so much harder or more intensive when you could just put your whole army into one group and move across the map and kill them.
Good.
Yeah, because no reason to get fancy about it.
Right.
If that literally will work. And that was just a lot harder to do in StarCraft. And honestly, I don't have in Brood War, and I honestly don't have a huge, a very deep understanding of that. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have more understanding of that, but I would very much encourage a note on a postcard for, or email from viewers who, if you have thoughts about Brood War and StarCraft 2, having played both of them, why Brood Wars is so much more strategic and considered. So I'd be very curious to hear about them.
Well, maybe it's time for us to pivot towards Subcom now, which is a highly strategic game, and on a totally different scale than Starcraft, which I noticed immediately playing the two back-to-back. Even on a fairly large Starcraft map, it felt much closer to the action and more confined, frankly, than in Subcom, where it feels like there's a very large amount of scale and a lot of room to move around.
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Just the ratio of unit to map size, right?
Yeah.
Is gigantic for Subcom.
Right.
Tiny little units and so much space to move them in. And then, obviously, again, we felt more confined on StarCraft because of the nature of that map. But in general, the maps just are nowhere near as large.
Yeah, I think that unit-to-screen ratio is a good one. It's adjustable in Subcom, but the average zoom level that a person plays Subcom at is, on itself, I think, indicative of... It's a game that's meant to be played more zoomed out. It's a lot of people just look at the icons, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you hardly even are looking at individual, unit models. Mm-hmm. Whereas StarCraft, that's the only thing you have.
Having watched a lot of Subcom, probably in close to over 100 hours worth of Subcom casts and games and reading guides and all that jazz and what I do when I get into a game. There's still a great number of you could show me unit models and I couldn't tell you what they are. If you told me what it was, like a Cybern Tech 2 tank, then I'd be like, oh, okay, I know how to use that or what that would look like. Mm-hmm. But if you showed me the model, I wouldn't probably be able to identify it because
it looks at that.
Exactly the way that Subcom is played, which is I think very cool and clever, is it's a variable zoom, so you can zoom into a normal RTS. Where you can see all the models and them interacting and kind of command a smaller space, and you can literally zoom all the way out to the point where the map becomes a mini-map that most RTSs have. You just have both of them. And then all the units turn to symbols as opposed to the actual models.
Right.
Yes, most of the time, both watching replay, and the other thing, like I said, I've watched a lot of replays, and watching replays to get a sense of what's happening on the map, you really truly do. This is true of StarCraft 2 to an extent, but with StarCraft you can pretty much look at a food counter, right? The amount of units you have. Mm-hmm. Both StarCraft 1 and 2 this is true of. Whoever had more food, honestly, even in the professional casts, they would have a graphic with the food counts next to each other to see who was ahead, who had more things.
Is that the minerals?
No, the population.
Oh, population. Right? Okay,
yeah,
sure.
So who had more of that was who was winning. In Subcom, to get a sense of what's happening or who's winning, you can't just look at who has more things necessarily. You literally have to pretty much zoom out to the whole map and see where things are, what units are being made, and kind of what area they're going or where the commander is and all of those different things. To get a sense of who's ahead, you actually really do need all of that larger information for Subcom, as opposed to in StarCraft, you can pretty much look at the armies, and you have a sense of who's doing better. Mm-hmm. Again, similarly with more niche strategies in niche. That's how I pronounced that in my head for a very long time.
Some people still pronounce it that way.
Do they?
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Is it correct?
I think it's ambiguous.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. All right. So, whatever. You can in large part just look at the armies in StarCraft and see who's ahead.
Yeah.
But wait, all that's to say,
you need to be able to sort of read people's long-term strategy and how well they're succeeding at them in a game like Subcom. Mm-hmm. In StarCraft, you don't necessarily have to do that in order to get a sense of just who's ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that strategy isn't important, but just that it's a quicker read because you don't have to consider what points is this person planning on taking over the next 20, 30 minutes? Because Subcom games also tend to be longer.
Yeah, exactly. That's another great point, is that even just in terms of the length of games, having, StarCraft games can end in seconds, actually, almost literally. Not within under a minute, but within 2 minutes, easy. The game can be decided, especially if someone recognizes the writing on the wall and GG's out. And just surrenders. That could be 90 seconds.
Wow.
Subcom, that would literally never happen. I cannot think of a way in which that could happen, even on a 1v1 map. And the larger maps, those take at least an hour to play.
I can think of a really cheesy way in PA that might happen, but
in PA,
yeah.
Which way? Oh, with the bots, the fire bots, the kamikaze ones.
Yes, yeah, Boombot Rush
or
Pelican Inferno Rush.
I don't remember that. Oh, the Infernos were the like,
tanks
close range flame checks.
Yeah, so you put a bunch of those in the like air transport, and then you just fly them over to their comm and drop them all,
and they blow up. Yep.
Anyway.
Good old PA, the redheaded stepchild of all of these games.
Yes.
Subcom specifically, but anyway, going back to Supreme Commander, we're talking about the level of strategy that goes into that and how it is more what you, again, there is definitely micro that goes into Subcom, particularly with the bigger units when you get towards the end of the game and you can build these giant monster experimentals. But even with Subcom, it really is more learning how the game engine worked. Remember, there are a few times where you had a hard time controlling air units.
Yeah.
Because you didn't. It's not like in StarCraft where you click and they just go a beeline. There's like acceleration and like movement and
they have flight patterns.
Yeah, exactly. They have to. They don't just like turn on a dime and turn around. They have to like. It feels like they're not listening to you.
Right.
But they are trying to, the AI is trying to follow through on it.
Mm-hmm. Which is something that had changed in PA, actually.
Yeah. You're right.
They are much more like, they fly like helicopters,
yeah.
basically. And they might even be designed like that to make it more believable. But in Subcom, they have flight paths. They have to follow the laws of physics. They don't just turn around.
Yeah. Or like when a bomber, you tell a bomber to attack something, it'll start its approach, and then once it gets to the point where it drops the bomb, you can't just tell, like, it has to finish the approach and, like, follow through before it peels off again, right?
Right.
As opposed to just kind of, like, dropping the bomb and immediately being able to go somewhere else.
Right.
So that's interesting. So anyway, all that is to say, there's tactical, like, learning how to control that would be, like, tactical, right? Like, being able to see the fact that these two things are coming together and knowing that, hey, I'll be able to control my fighters better than the opponent, and I'll get the drop on them, I'll get behind them, and I'll get a really good pass, and I'll win this engagement. That's, like, tactical. So Subcom has tactics, and similarly, StarCraft, we were talking about, like, who's ahead. I'm generalizing in pretty broad strokes for both games. In terms of a big thing for StarCraft could be, you could look at the army, but say one player has a bigger army, player has a slightly smaller army, but one player's on 5 bases and the other one's on 2 bases. Well, that bigger army will probably be able to be harassed and harried by the smaller army, and he won't be able to reproduce his units as much as the players on 5 bases that can remax himself, get himself all the way up to the population max again and again, so that player's going to win. So again, there's some level of ambiguity for both of them. I think just in general, though, Subcom is far closer to, again, there's a lot of different ways that you can kill, like, the commander, right? Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of different things that you can do. And I think that's an interesting thing, too, because it's such an easier, smaller task than destroying everything.
Right.
Like, if you played Subcom in the same way as StarCraft, I would guess there'd be a lot less strategy involved, honestly.
Yeah.
There'd be a tons of things that wouldn't work. You couldn't do any commander snipes. You couldn't use strategic bomber. There's all times the ways you use units would change. Mm-hmm. It would all be about being able to break through fortification as opposed to being able to break a certain part of the fortification or be able to figure out a way to get certain things to a location that they might not normally be able to do. And then the other last one,
okay.
And I'm curious on your thoughts about this, having even played Subcom. Subcom also has a very different vision system and the way that information's gathered. So Subcom has, most RTSs have a shroud, a black shroud, that you can't see anything through, and then you can cover it with a unit, and you can see things, and then there will be a lighter shroud that will cover it again, called the Fog of War, which just means if you don't have vision on an area, then you just can only see, once the Fog of War comes back, you can only see the last thing you saw there, right? You don't see anything new until you rescout it.
Right.
Subcom is not like that. It has the same Fog of War and Shroud rules as most other games, but you have radar as well that can detect things through the Shroud. And then if you identify that, so like say a unit dips into radar, you get vision on it so you see what it is, and you have it on radar, but then it leaves your vision, you still keep that unit identified, right? Even through the radar. Even through the shroud. So even if they're outside of it, you'll always be able to see that. Now, if they leave radar and then come back, then it's suddenly unidentified again.
Right.
So and also the other thing, the way that's designed is Subcom has weapons that almost all of the units have a higher weapon range than their vision is, which is not normal. Most other games, those are pretty much synonymous.
Right.
So you actually really need to have really good either intel or radar coverage to make the most of your units.
Right. It actually gives a purpose to scouts later in the game.
Yeah, very much so. Particularly when you're building these big, huge artillery pieces or things with these ridiculous ranges that can fire pretty much anywhere, but you need to actually have vision to be able to tell them where to fire.
Right.
So I don't know. It's all of that adds up. I don't know. I'm trying to put together why that would make something far more strategic than tactical in that way.
Well, the thing that stuck out to me as you were talking is the ratio between basically the number of resources versus the target that you're shooting at.
Yeah.
So I wonder if as that ratio increases, that things start to feel more strategic.
Yeah.
Because more resources mean more options.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the smaller your target is, the easier the target is, because killing a comm is relatively easy. Then basically you have a lot of different ways you could try to do that.
Yeah.
And you also have a lot of ways your opponent's going to try to do that. So you have to worry about defending against that. And work around it and try to counter your opponent's strategy. And so if you have a bunch of air units and your opponent doesn't have any anti-air, you're in a really good situation.
Right.
And one of the things in subcom is that you can, at any level, you can produce these units, any type of unit, right? You can start off air, you can start off land, you can start off naval. Yeah. And so immediately you have 3 different ways you could try to produce units to try to get to this ultimate goal of killing the comm. Yes, it's just one goal, but there's a lot of different ways you could get there.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
In StarCraft, the amount of resources you have increases pretty much at the same rate that your target area increases, because your opponent is also expanding.
Literally 1-to-1. Yeah.
Right. An ideal like mirror mode, the opponent's doing and expanding at the same rate as you.
Right.
Your target is increasing as fast as you are.
Yeah.
In a subcom match, that's actually not true.
Yeah.
In fact, you reach a point where both people have so many resources that it's actually super unstable.
Yeah.
Because either person could easily kill the other person given the right moment. All they need is an opening.
Yeah, exactly. You have way more than enough firepower to blow up a comm to do 20,000 hit points worth of damage. But it's so much that you have to figure out how to do that.
Right. You have to get an opening.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is I think that's a huge that's an excellent thought, and that's a huge difference. Which is finding openings in StarCraft is a lot simpler than that's to some extent that's the game, right? Like in SubCom is figuring out what that opening is,
right?
Across the whole game, not just towards the end when you have these big huge things that can blow up a comm in 1 or 2 shots,
right?
But you can have points. And it's the other thing that I really enjoy about Supreme Commander is that you can all 3 tiers of the technology. This could be another big discussion, like progression in RTS games, but you can kill a comm with any 3 of those. You can kill a comm with a horde of T1 units within the T1, obviously T2, and all the way up through 3, and then the experimentals. StarCraft, there's only so much you can do at lower tech, right? Like unless that's not entirely true. It's a little bit different. If you can win really quickly, but once you get to a certain point, equilibrium's kind of reached, and then whoever has the bigger army. There's another thing I was thinking about, which was just in my natural, as I watch replays and watch competitive versions of both games, I found myself, when I watched StarCraft, and again, less so for Brood War. I've watched a lot more StarCraft 2 than Brood War, to be fair. There's a lot of times I actually had a very difficult time discerning why a player won.
Interesting.
It just appeared that they both were doing something very similar, which was expanding, scouting, avoiding large engagements, and then there would be one large engagement, and whoever came out on top there would then win.
Interesting. Okay.
And that was it. And I was like, why did they... They were both... This definitely does happen when both players would be close to maxed, so they would have the unit pop cap.
Right.
And then they would meet in combat, and the battle would take 10 to 20 seconds. And then one of them would have units and one wouldn't, and it was like, all right, well, that's it.
Yeah, because that person can just do whatever they want at that point.
And you just walk over it. And obviously there's levels of that too, but in large part, that was how most StarCraft games go. And that's kind of frustrating as a viewer. With SubCom, again, partially maybe because it's a slower game, but I remember, when I watch, it's so much easier, and I'm so much more a strategic thinker than a tactical thinker. I'm so much better at that. I like ideas and time to think, and watching SubCom unfold, it's also really interesting to watch from a observer standpoint, where you have the whole map, right?
Right.
And you can be like, oh, if you just did this, if you just build these units, you would win immediately. And why don't you see this? Why there's such a clear strategic option here, and why you keep on throwing these experimental units into the grinder when you could build 3 strap bombers and kill them?
Right.
That was the level I was thinking on, was you should be doing this instead of doing this. So not like commanding your units better, or like it was like you should be a totally different mindset in the way you're approaching this. You shouldn't be investing in shielding and T3 fabs. You should be spending all the power that you're putting into fabs and upgrading your comm and getting towards a upgrade on your commander that allows you to teleport and snipe your opponent. Or why are you going ground experimentals when you could put all of this in T3 air, get air superiority, and then you could just outlast them, you could outgrind them.
Right.
Or, so many different things that you can do in SubCom, truly. Or, why are you investing in this game ender when you could just build a horde of T3 units with the same exact amount of resources and just go in and kill them?
Right.
And that's just, I very rarely found myself thinking that with StarCraft. Which was like, why aren't you doing? If you only just did this, then it'd be pretty clear. And I think that's one potential problem with highly strategic games, which is it can get maybe a little bit simpler. Where like, hey, if you just do this, then there's nothing the other guy can do.
Right.
Like there's very little response or counterplay that you can do, which that's less fun as well. Certainly for a player.
Yeah.
Playing counterplay is
less back and forth.
Is a really fun thing to do, and at its best, StarCraft does that so well. I think that's something they tried to do, was to try to reduce the impact of one big engagement, and rather have it be multiple engagements and give the player, if they lost that engagement, some comeback potential.
Yeah.
Which SubCom does very, very well.
I felt that also in playing StarCraft.
Yeah.
Like, it almost felt elastic, almost bouncy. Of like, okay, I can wipe out like a base,
Yeah,
but
you're
like
talking about
they're just
that.
gonna get another base.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't seem to matter what I do, because I wasn't used to that level of back and forth, and like that level of resiliency between armies.
And that's even
like in a game like SubCom, it's much more brittle, where it's like you cut off the supply lines, you stop them from expanding, you take over the rest of the map, and then you just nuke them to hell.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's it.
Yeah, there's nothing to do. And even just in terms of the win conditions, right?
Right.
Like, you can lose one of your bases in StarCraft, and you still have more bases, and you can keep on playing.
Yeah.
If you lose your comm, there's no counterplay to that. It's over,
exactly.
Right?
That's it.
It's a moment. So that's an interesting. That's interesting in terms of there is a problem, and that they tend to call something along the lines of like rock paper scissors, where that's a little bit less fun. Where like, hey, if you have rock, then and the other person goes scissors, then you win, and the other person can't do anything, right?
Right.
And that can get into a problem itself. So it really is really different types of games, and I think some other things here. StarCraft's a notoriously fast game in terms of the speed of units, movement, attacking, and the engagements themselves, very, very quick. SubCom, far less so. A lot more time to be able to respond, even in-game, to things as they're happening. A little bit hard to get snuck up on, Yeah. Then you can definitely do in StarCraft, and that's not a good bad thing. That's just a different thing. It takes a very different preference, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would say overall the pacing is slower. Even like the most squishy unit in SubCom, I don't think really has the same fragility as like some of the super squishy StarCraft units.
That's another interesting thing that I wonder on your thoughts about this. I mentioned this a little bit when we were playing StarCraft, which was and this gets a little bit into tech levels too, remember how you were really surprised when the Zerg built their highest tier unit in Ultralisk came in, and I shot it with like 15 Marines and killed it.
Yeah.
And you were surprised by the fact that our first unit Marines could down an Ultralisk.
Right, which is
felt
like
weird.
They're experimental.
Exactly, precisely. In SubCom, if you build 15 to 20 T1 tanks and they have a single experimental, it's game over, right? Not even close. You can actually have 15 T3 units, and an experimental can still kill all of them.
Yeah, I was going to say like 1 or 2 T3, you might be able to take 15 T1s.
Yeah, easy. Yeah, absolutely. The scaling between the tiers in SubCom is super sharp.
Yeah.
Super, super sharp. T1 becomes almost obsolete once you hit T2, and so on and so forth. Not always. There are some certain types of units that are. As opposed to StarCraft, a Marine is the first unit you build and potentially the last unit you build. Marines are always good throughout the whole game. And similar to and obviously battle cruisers are a better unit pound for pound, but there's one, less of a chance to get there, and two, you have less option. You have a lot more of your army built up into a single unit. More resources spent on it. So if you lose it in a game of resources, that's a higher cost.
Yeah, a very high concentration of resources that all have to move as one thing.
So I don't know. What do you think about that? I don't know how I feel about that. It does feel a lot harder and harsher in SubCom world, right? Where you have, again, less chance for counterplay, right? Mm-hmm. Where they build the right experimental and you don't have the stuff to counter it, you lose.
Yeah.
If I see Ultralisks coming or a few Ultralisks, I can still build Marines. I don't have to change my build order.
Yeah.
And still overcome them. It's not the most efficient way to do it. Ultralisks are really good against Marines. Mm-hmm. It'd be better if I used my siege tanks. So then there's some strategic. But that's more tactical thinking there. That might be a slight switch in strategy, which is, hey, I see Ultralisks, now I'm going to decide to try a different way of winning instead of mass Marines.
Right.
Or that would even be the Zerg strategy. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Like the fact that pretty much anything can kill anything in StarCraft, and it's definitely not the case in SubCom.
Yeah, there's definitely something there worth thinking through, where the way that you build up units in StarCraft, it's almost like you don't have to change your unit composition really, and you could still win. In SubCom, you have to change your unit composition. Yeah. Like whatever you start in the first 5 to 10 minutes, you're not going to win with. Like it seems very unlikely you're going to win with that. If the game goes another 10 minutes, there's no way you're going to win with that.
Yeah, remember even when I was that naval map, and I had a cruiser, and they had they were building torpedoes. Mm-hmm. They were building subs, and I was like, I built this huge T2 unit, mm-hmm. and it was the wrong thing, and it was completely useless.
Yeah.
And or vice versa, that one cruiser was able to shoot down all of their. They had something else that had missiles, and cruisers have tactical missile defense.
Right. Yeah.
And so one cruiser shut down like the entirety of their attack missile spam.
Right.
That's an interesting. Anyway, sorry, keep on going. Well, anyway, the stuff you build does change, absolutely.
Right. So you have to have a diversity in your build, which I do think there's sort of a. Both approaches, you end up with a lot of options about what you could be building.
That's true.
It's interesting that so much of your units actually become obsolete in SubCom. They don't really in StarCraft.
Yeah.
So in that way, you actually have more options at the end game in StarCraft, because you could mass Marines.
Yep.
Whereas no one playing SubCom is like, I'm going to mass T1 and take them out.
Yeah, at the end game.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, with that, it was a reverse problem, which was, in the case of Terran and particularly StarCraft 2, Marines were too good. You actually wouldn't build higher tier units because it absolutely wasn't worth it. There's no reason to. Marines were by far the cheapest, most efficient, safest way to deal with anything. You'd build Marines, Marauders, and Medevacs, 3 Ms. That was it. And mass Marines by itself was by far the best one. So similarly, so you wouldn't build Banshees, you wouldn't build Thors, and you don't know what any of these units are. But they're the higher tech Terran units. Right. You never see battle cruisers.
Yeah.
You never see Ravens. These units that are really cool and fun and interesting designs, but are completely obsolete because that's the other thing. Yeah, like SubCom, at least you'll see a lot of different types of units, and you are always on that kind of level of, okay, if he does this, then I have to. Again, the strategic thinking I think is a little bit more there, as opposed to you can kind of pick one strategy and maybe stick with it in StarCraft, and maybe have to change it or mold it a little bit depending on what your opponent's doing. But in SubCom, the strategic decision-making branch, I feel like the tree would be there's a lot of potential branches. You see them going this, and then I'm planning on doing this, but they went this other direction, so I have to think of how to counter that, but also bring this other thing in, and
well, that whole process you're talking about really forces the consolidation of resources. So in a case of like StarCraft, you could choose to consolidate resources and build a battle cruiser,
right?
And that's an option, and it opens you up to certain problems, which is all your resources are in one basket.
Yeah.
In SubCom, you kind of have to do that, right? Like your T3 unit is a far more concentrated set of resources than your T1 units,
right?
But because they're so much better, you have to do that.
Yeah, but it's actually worth it. Yeah, it's just objectively the better decision.
And so you're forced to put more and more of your eggs in these baskets. And I wonder, it almost has a pruning effect. Like you have to focus your attention on going to a certain experimental unit. And so that actually has the effect of And it allows for more counterplay in a certain way, because if you can see which way direction your opponent's going strategically, if they're committed to that strategy, like, they can't just pivot.
Yeah.
They can't just delete everything and be like, oh, I want those resources back, now I'm going Marines.
Right, yeah.
Because they've already invested all of their resources in
one basket.
Develop this one experimental, and then your opponent knows, if I can counter that experimental, like, I've got a really good chance of winning this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting... I like the way you're bringing up, like, also anyone who... all of the kind of top... this is just true of RTSs in general, and pretty much any game, I think, you could really reduce down to this, but the player with more resources will win an RTS. Mm-hmm. So, to take it outside of the strategic thinking, it's also true in Subcom. If you have more resources, like, the point is to get more resources, always. And that's not a bad
economy
thing.
wars.
That's just, exactly, basically. Right. And so the distribution and the way those resources are used, hence, would make a huge impact on the way the game played. Goes out, which is a really interesting thing. Like, think about seeing, not the unit models, but like little packs of resources that are moving around, right? And so you see this giant sink of resources and an experimental, or a bunch of tiny little resources moving around for Marines. Mm-hmm. And you can see why it'd be so much safer to have your resources spread out in a far... you can lose a couple Marines and you don't lose a thing.
Right. And if it's just as effective, like...
Right, exactly. Then that's far safer, right? Like, that's just good investment.
Right.
You want to
diversify.
Consolidate. Yeah. Or you don't want to consolidate all in one place. Or vice versa, right? Like, as you lose Marines... As this is another interesting thing with big units versus small units, which when you have a big horde of small units, every time damage is taken, you lose something that's dealing damage. So you're effective... If you add up all of the health pool... of all your tiny units and all the damage they do. As the health goes down, the damage goes down too.
Right.
With a big unit, there's very few games in which basically you can take damage and you can lose health and your damage stays the exact same until it is at 0.
Right.
A 1 health big unit does as much damage as a full health unit.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
As opposed to a horde of smaller units, if they take 50% damage, they are now at 50%
firepower. Right.
And so that's another risk you run on both ends. But, the difference there being, if you hit that event horizon with the bigger unit, it is gone. Mm-hmm. And if you go down to 10% of your smaller unit army, you still have 10 units left.
Right.
And you can begin rebuilding or using them to harass or whatever strategic thing there can be done with it. So I don't know. I love RTSs for this reason, and this is just 2 of them. I mean, good lord, like I mentioned, Dawn of War games or the Company Heroes, or certainly the Command and Conquer series, Age of Empires,
Homeworld.
Yep, Homeworld.
Warcraft.
Yeah, Warcraft's an interesting one too, because that's the building blocks to MOBAs even before MOBAs were a thing. The idea of a single hero units in RTS is an interesting thing too.
Yeah.
That the game was far more about correct hero usage, and then it was like half hero, half the rest of the game.
Right.
And
people
so
made mods where it was all hero, and then we had MOBAs.
Special shout out to
No, that's fine.
Shout out to Star Wars Empire at War, which remember I was talking about big units that have that introduced in naval combat the idea that there would be a big unit with subsystems on it. So you could destroy the torpedo launcher, right? And that would still take away from the total health, but the torpedo launcher would have its own health and could be targeted specifically, or you could target the shield generator, or you could target the warp drive.
Homeworld 2 also did that.
Yeah.
I don't know if 1 did, but...
Homeworld 1 did that.
Yeah, you could have different upgrades and bays and things.
Yeah. So that's a cool way to get around that problem we were talking about with big units, which is...
you can reduce the firepower without killing the unit.
Yeah. And picking... And that was... the people that made that, a studio named Petroglyph, who are the last remnants of, actually, Westwood, the guys that did the original Command & Conquer and Red Alert series, which are my favorites. And they went, after they're doing Empire War, they did a game called Universal War, which was entirely different. It's just a new IP.
Okay.
And they built an entire faction. The spaceships were so successful, people loved that system so much, they built a whole faction around an RTS faction where you just had one unit, basically. It was this gigantic unit that you could upgrade, and it would build... It was your whole base in one giant alien tripod, basically. And you could put weapons on it, or you could put resource allocation, or you could put unit production, so you could build more units and get things out of it, but the whole thing was hardpoints until you didn't have a base. That was your whole base. And then there were 2 other factions that had, a normal kind of base building mechanic, and then another slightly different one. And that was an awesome game that was super underrated. It came out right before StarCraft 2 did, and got super overshadowed, because StarCraft 2 was slightly better and infinitely less creative, in my opinion.
Well, it's time for us to, with no time left, pivot to talking about Grey Goo.
Oh my god! that was also Petroglyph.
Was it?
Yeah, it's the same guys, actually.
Okay, that's funny, because when you were talking about it, I was thinking, because Grey Goo has some very creative armies in it as well, specifically the Goo.
Yeah, the Goo. Yeah. It was the same guy. I mean, yeah, their thing was trying to... They were trying to push the RTS idea as far as possible, basically, and make really unique factions.
Right.
Not just the build a base and build units and collect resources.
Right, not just a unique specialty unit, but like a whole faction that functioned differently.
Yeah, the Goo was brilliant, man. That worked really well too. It was really fun to play.
Yeah. I haven't played it too much.
Oh, yeah. but yeah, so do you want to talk about
all right, so
the future?
The future. We are going to be starting a new project, which will mean that we're going to be streaming a lot more. We're going to be streaming some playthroughs of StarCraft 1 and 2.
Yep, man, that's the idea, Ian.
Yeah, well, and specifically with an idea of comparing the development of the narrative in the games, and also we'll probably have an eye toward tactics and gameplay as well, just because it's hard not to.
Yeah.
And so we'll be playing and streaming those things, and that probably will mean that we take a break from producing episodes as frequently. If we have a conversation that really feels like it's bubbling, then we'll go ahead and put an episode out. But otherwise, we're going to try to do a more long-form research project, basically, about the development of these 2 games, which are quite different, even though they're produced by the same studio and are in the same universe and everything, same IP. They're quite different, and it's going to be really interesting to explore these 2 games, and we certainly will release an episode when we've concluded the project, and probably
several, I think.
Probably several episodes.
Is what I'm envisioning, yeah.
And so, and that way we might be going away for a bit from the podcast, but if you are looking to hear our sweet voices, we will certainly be putting up our videos on YouTube, available on stream. Yeah. You can always shoot us an email. And we fully intend to record episodes and thoughts while we're playing, and put them out.
And yeah, if we just, if depending on how long this takes, if it gets too long, we might, take some time off and do a stream of a different type of game, or do something else that we're excited about. But yeah, I think the majority of our creative energy and output is going to be going towards going through the single player campaigns in 1 and 2, and taking a look a lot at the story, which is one of my favorite parts, as well as just a broader conversation about the story of Blizzard through the years, and is really well exemplified between StarCraft 1 and 2, because those 2 releases were so far apart, as opposed to, say, Frozen Throne and World of Warcraft, or Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. Those are pretty big difference there too, but not nearly as big as StarCraft 1 and 2, which was...
I remember how anticipated StarCraft 2 was.
At least 12 years?
Yeah.
12 or 13 years? So, in any case, I'm super excited. We both are, and have tons of ideas, and hopefully it'll be fun to watch a playthrough of some of the absolute classics in RTS.
I know almost nothing about StarCraft.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
In terms of like the story, I literally know nothing.
Yeah.
My knowledge of StarCraft pretty much stops at the races and some of the units.
Yeah.
That's really it.
On the other hand, I have seen and played the entirety of the... And in combination, I haven't played the entirety of it, but I've watched and read every ounce of StarCraft lore that might be out there. So yeah, it'll be really fun to have both sides of that.
If you want to watch Greg struggle to not ruin StarCraft for me, tune in. Because I know that Greg loves talking about this stuff.
I do, yeah. That'll be a constant. If you just want to see pain in my eyes for like a month, that'll be what we're doing.
What is a Zerg?
Oh my god, it's spelled ZURJ, I believe.
Zerg.
Yeah, Zerg.
Okay, good.
It's like a little bit of phlegm in the back. Oh, so. Alrighty, well, if you guys do have thoughts, you can email us at gerg@gergandmuxl.com or muxl@gergandmuxl.com. Yep. We do have access to those and check them. Yep. And we'll be more than happy to hear your thoughts about anything, be it the cast today or a past cast or the incoming Starcraft
barrage.
Yes, attack. Please do so. And I hope you guys are having a good spring. And we will see you very soon.
Goodbye.